I'm sorry not to be able to give this talk in Russian. Indeed, I will speak in English, but you will have, thanks to Nikita Rokatian, I don't know if Nikita is here, you will have Nikita is here, so he did the work to, so he took my English presentation, and at least you will have the, the comments of the graph in Russian. So I hope it was correct, because otherwise I'm unable to check. So anyway, so what we will discuss today is about one thing which is my scientific life. As I am a climatologist. I work on the paleoclimate, on the future climate change, and it's clear that one key question is about the influence of human activities on climate. So is what I will discuss today, from things you may know. So it's really a field where we have some certainties. We are sure of, I would say, three things. We are sure of the fact that our activities, through our activities, we are modifying the composition of the atmosphere. We are modifying the composition of the atmosphere, in particular in these three greenhouse gases: carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous dioxide. And you see that this has, on the left, these graphs are the last 2,000 years, and you see the increase of the concentration of these three gases in the atmosphere. A rapid increase over the last 200 years, more than about 40% for carbon dioxide, more than double for methane. And we are sure that this is due to human activities. Second thing we are sure of is that our climate is warming. Okay? I will tell more about our warming climate, but these are the data, mean on the right, mean average annual temperature since 1880, since the end of the 19th century. And you see this increase of temperature, in particular over the recent decades. But what is very important is that we have other indication than the thermometer of this increase of this global warming. As you think, glacier are retreating. There is less sea ice. There is also less snow during winter. For example, the extension of snow over Siberia has decreased over the last 50 years very clearly. And this is important because this snow play a role in what we call the albedo feedback. That means that there is a lot of light which is sent back to the sky when you have a lot of snow. But when snow disappears, you have absorption of heat, and so this increases the global warming. So we have also the third thing we are sure of is that global warming will continue. For us, it's a certainty. But we have also a lot of uncertainties, a lot of questions that we cannot answer precisely. We will discuss a bit. And we have also a lot of questions. For example, the question which is generally asked is this global warming already due to human activities or not? So I will try to discuss all these aspects. Starting to tell you about what is the origin of so I try to tell you that we are modifying the we can close the door maybe? I don't know. What we know, you see that you see here the distribution when you these compounds are greenhouse gases, and their properties is mostly to trap heat when, I mean, to trap a part of the radiation which is reflected at the Earth's surface. So when you increase the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, you accumulate heat in the lower layer of the atmosphere. This is clear. This accumulation of heat, this additional greenhouse gases, is largely due to, you see in red, so you have carbon dioxide. So a large part of carbon dioxide is due to fossil fuel, gas, oil, coal. But there is also another part due to biomass deforestation. The second contributor is methane, which is due both to natural sources and to agricultural practices, but also to industry. N2O is also due to both due to industry and agriculture, and gas chlorofluorocarbide are gas with fluorine, which were produced only by industry. So we know well what we are doing in terms of additional greenhouse gases and what are the reasons of this. You can see this by a sector. It's important to see by sector of activity. So you have in the two bars tell you what are the emissions of greenhouse gases, both in 90 and in 2004, and you see that they generally increased. The red is for CO2, green for CH4, and you see that, for example, for energy supply, a lot comes from CO2. This is true also for transport. Obviously, when you use oil, obviously it's mostly used for transport. Residential is a heating system, but also all the electricity you use at home. The industry, when you look at agriculture, it also contributes to the increase of greenhouse gases, but mostly through methane and nitrous dioxide. Forestry is also contributing because when you have deforestation, it is a contribution, and you have also waste. And when you produce in waste, you produce a lot of methane. At least a significant amount of methane. So what is the message? Is that clearly we know why how we are modifying the atmosphere. We don't know in the detail. In our project, for example, we would like to know better what are the carbon and the carbon cycle of our Western Siberia. This is part of our project, but we really know well the origin of, I would say, the additional greenhouse gases. Another important point, and so this is close from my work. I myself, I directly work on this Vostok ice core, which was drilled with Russian colleagues from St. Petersburg and Moscow. So in this ice core from Vostok covers the last 400,000 years, and indeed we have extended on another ice core over the last 800,000 years. In red, you have the temperature in Antarctica, which is reconstructed from the isotopic composition of the ice, and in the air bubbles, you can reconstruct variation of carbon dioxide and variation of methane, at least in green. So you see, the more recent period is on the left, and you see very well that the values that we have in the atmosphere currently, the current values that we have never been reached over the last 800,000 years. This is not true if you go further back in time. In the Cretaceous, for example, you will find a period where there was more CO2 than today. But over the last, I would say, million years, it's clear that we have never, so this also tells you that this increase is very rapid. The increase of CO2 is very rapid and very important. There are two messages. The other message is that you see that you have a correlation between greenhouse gases and the temperature in Antarctica. what tell you is that you have really indeed a role of greenhouse gases in the past. So here you have the glacial period, interglacial period. So the succession of glacial and interglacial period is due to its origin in the orbital forcing, the fact that the Earth's orbit is changing with time, which makes that insolation is changing with time. But this tells you also that you have some relationship between greenhouse gases and climate in the past. So I come back on the more recent period, because on the global warming, so the second aspect, this first aspect that we are really modifying our atmosphere. Global warming, this I show on the last 60 years, and you see very well that the last decade, the last 10 years were really warmer than the previous decades. Interesting also, the warmest year was, up to now, was 2010. 2011 was slightly less warm, still a warm year, but one explanation is that during this 2011 you had a El Niño event, and this El Niño event really correspond to a colder Pacific Ocean, colder than its average temperature. And this, when you have an El Niño year, you have a tendency to have a slightly colder year, which is normal. So, indeed, 2011 was the warmest year if you only select the years in blue with La Niña. So, another indication of global warming, which is very important, is that very clear, is that you have a sea level rise. You see this sea level rise. I would say since over the 20th century, since 100 years or so, since the beginning of the 20th century, sea level rise has been not far from 20 centimeters. Okay, you say 20 centimeters is nothing for a lot of people, but for some people it's important. In some areas it's already important. But one of the interests of this is that it really tells you that our climate is really warming, because this sea level rise has two origins. The fact that ocean itself is warming, and when ocean warms, there is a thermal expansion, it slightly expands, and this is seen. And the second contribution is due to glaciers, either mid-latitude glaciers, or glacier from polar regions, and we know that, for example, Greenland and Antarctica contribute for sea level change every year. Every year, sea level change, sea level rise is of practically now we are 3 millimeters a year, and practically half of it, or 40% of it, is due to the contribution of Greenland and Antarctica. So sea level change, what I mean there, it's really sea level change is really a good indicator of global warming. You have also, I would say, glacier retreat in the Alpine region, but you have also, what is very clear is what you expect. You expect more water vapor in the atmosphere because the ocean is warming, and this is observed. We have real observations that there is more water vapor in the atmosphere than 20 or 40 years ago, a few percent, exactly as we expect. So we have a lot of indication of this global warming, is what I want to say. So this global warming, this global warming is not uniform. As you saw, when you look at global warming, I took the year 2010, the warmest year, with respect to the year 1970. And you see this warming. This warming is relatively important. It's 2/3 of 1 degree. It's really you can perceive it. But you see that when you look at colors, brown colors and red colors means higher warming. So the warming is relatively limited over oceanic areas, and is higher over the continent, and even higher over Arctic region. For example, when you look at most of Siberia and indeed most of Western Europe, and the continent, you see that it's between 1 and 2 degrees C. Practically, when you look at data in this region, the global warming is practically twice the average global warming. It can be even larger in the Arctic. In the Arctic, you have some sites where the global warming over the last 40 years exceeds 2 degrees C. So what? No. We have a key question. I mean, we know very well that okay. What is? It's not because greenhouse gases are increasing, and so this means that also we have more heat in the lower layer of the atmosphere. Your heating is larger by 1% practically with respect to what we had 200,000 years. We have added 1% of heat in the lower layer of the atmosphere, but it's not because heating is increased and that we observed global warming that we have proven that there is a relationship between greenhouse gases and climate, because it is true that our Earth's surface, as known as experienced change of climate without human activities. As I showed you, you have a lot of natural climate variability. So it's normal to ask the question: is what we are experiencing now, is it due to human activities, or is it natural? Or what is the part which is natural? What is the part which is due to human activity? So this, indeed, I should have mentioned that a large part of the plots that I show you are come from the fourth report of the International Panel on Climate Change. I am myself vice chair of IPCC, of the working group 1 of IPCC. And so this is a key, I think, a key graph of this report, which was published in 2007. We are just preparing the 5th report now, which will come next year. But this is its key figure, which tried to answer this question. What we see, we know that if you look at natural climate variability over the last century, the main contribution should be from solar variability, or also for volcanic activity. It's clear that when you have a volcanic event, an important volcanic event, there is a cooling of a few tenths of degrees C, which lasts over a few years. It's well documented. You have also variation of solar activity, but this variation is very small. And when we account both for solar and volcanic activity change, this is a blue curve in the bottom plot, in the lower plot, and you see that you cannot explain with natural activity or with natural forcing alone. You cannot explain the warming. This is the lower plot. On the contrary, when you account both for natural forcing and forcing due to human activities, this is the top plot. You correctly explain the warming of the last 5 decades, the last 15 years. I have to mention that when we talk about human impact on climate, we should not restrict to greenhouse gases. There is also a contribution of I mean, pollution itself through aerosols is also a climate driver. Indeed, when you have more pollution, in particular sulfate aerosols, you have a cooling effect. In some simplistic way, aerosols, I would say pollution is counteracting part of warming which is due to greenhouse gases. But you have to account both for greenhouse gases and other sources of, other forcing due to human activities. So this is done in this plot, and it's clear that the conclusion of IPCC report, which is important conclusion, is that most of the observed warming over the last 50 years, is really our conclusion, is probably, very likely, more than 9 or 10 odds, the odds is 9 to 10, more than 90% due to human activities. So we don't say all of the warming is due, but most of the warming is due to human activity. This is key conclusion of our scientific community. So let's turn now to the future. Future climate is important, is an important case. So when you want to look at the future, obviously you don't know exactly. You understand well that our future climate will depend on the amount of emissions of greenhouse gases and of also aerosols. So to be able to predict with a climate model the climate in 10 years, in 50 years, at the end of the century or beyond the end of the century, we use climate models, but this climate model should be a necessary input is to have to know the emissions, and so indeed we use different scenarios. We don't know exactly what will be the emissions of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. So we use different scenarios which are provided by economists. And here, this shows a scenario which in English is called business as usual scenario. It's a scenario when there is not so much effort to change. There is a rapid increase of CO2 emission, and there is little effort done to curb this emission. And so what you see in this case that you have a warming which can be at the end of the century of average warming of about 3 degrees C, but again twice higher in this region. I will come in the detail more. So, and here you have 3 scenarios. So we have 3 scenarios. What you have to know is that when going from the top to the bottom, you have the figure. The figure is the total amount of greenhouse gases which are emitted over this century. As you see, practically in the bottom scenario A2, you emit twice the amount of scenario B1. And scenario A1B is an intermediate scenario. It's indeed the one I showed you before. So, with no surprise, at the end of the century, more you emit greenhouse gases, warmer will be the climate. Indeed, when you see indeed, with respect to the total amount of cumulative amount of greenhouse gases over the 20th century, you have practically warming. Double in scenario A2 than in scenario B1. The warming is more than 3 degrees C, and less than 2 degrees C is the first case, and no surprise, A1B gives you an intermediate warming. So this warming at the end of the year, at the end of the century, will be very important. You have to realize that, obviously, we can see that when you go from the last glacial maximum to present day, Okay, this last glacial maximum was 20,000 years ago. When you look at this climate, which was very different from current day climate, for example, in this region it was 10 to 15 degrees colder or even colder, because you have really even an ice sheet in some part of Siberia. So even in this very different climate, the average temperature change between last glacial maximum and today is estimated to 5 to 6 degrees. So when you think of 3 degree change, of 3 degree warming, is half of the warming which has been associated to this transition from the last glacial maximum to today's climate. So it's not nothing, and the last climatic transition took between 5 and 10,000 years, and here we are talking on the end of the century, of 1 century. Right? So you see that it's very important warming and very rapid, and it's no longer for future generation. I hope that in this last decade, in this part of, in this last part of this century, a lot of you will be here. So it's no longer a future generation, it's you. That is important to understand. It's your generation. And it will be a very different climate if we do nothing. This is clear. And not very attractive. Maybe, we can discuss of Siberia. It can be not, so it may be different in your region. But and another thing also is that when you look at next, at the coming decade, indeed, at the coming decade, the climate looks very similar. The three climate looks very similar. So the climate of the next decade, we don't know this climate yet well. But what we can claim is that it's practically independent on what we will emit over the coming 15 years, I would say. Simply because this climate first depends on the greenhouse gases which are already in the atmosphere. Obviously we will add more if you have the more emitting scenario, but okay. So the problem is not for next decade, it's really for, I would say, the second part of this century and beyond. That is very important. So the last thing I would like to mention is that when I put, for example, 2.8 degrees C, and below you have 1.7 and 4.4, indeed this type of simulation were performed by at least 15 models around the world. And they all show that you can have warming, but some models show less warming, below 2 degrees C, and some other models show higher warming, above 4 degrees C. So there are the two extremes. You have to realize we have also uncertainties, because even with the same scenario, you don't get the same warming when you take 15 models. You have also a variability. So, consequences. So, you have a lot of consequences. I don't want to be too. So, I will come back on the fact that you have more frequent heat waves, which is obvious. Increased risk of droughts. Okay, I will come back on extremes. Also for floods, more intense precipitation events. I will mention this also. There is also the risk of more intense cyclones. The number of cyclones should not increase, but the maximum wind speed should increase. And the damages are really due to extreme events. I will come back on this, but it's clear that damages are due to extreme events, drought, cyclones, floods, and this sea level rise is also a problem. As question, we have also a lot of question on permafrost. As you know, under the permafrost, in the permafrost, and under the permafrost, you have a lot of organic matter. We don't know exactly how much, That is, and we don't know exactly if this organic matter will decompose in methane or carbon dioxide. It depends. But it's clear because methane, one molecule of methane is more than 23 much active in terms of absorption than a molecule of CO2. So, and so there is a lot of question about. So you understand that if permafrost is melting and that if Morse, I mean, it's obviously with formation of methane or CO2, this will increase the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. This is a positive feedback, which is not well known yet. And it's really one reason of the study we are. There are a lot of groups now interested in permafrost. It's because we don't know really yet their possible role as climate amplifiers. We don't know. I mean, you should not be also it can be less dramatic than some people are thinking, but it has to be explored clearly. We have to know better about the permafrost. Ocean acidification, this is a real problem also because when you inject CO2 in the ocean, you have ocean acidification, and you see it already, and this has consequences of the formation of carbonates on the life in the sea. So I mean, all the sea productivity, corals can be affected, for example, coral reefs. So you have real problem linked with human activities. A lot of influence on ecosystem. It's clear that ecosystems are modified when climate is modifying. On health, also, I mean, I only remind you that in France, we were not prepared for the heat wave in 2003, and we had 15,000 additional deaths. 15,000 during 10 years in France, 10 days. Okay, so agriculture, there will be a lot of influence on agriculture. Tourism, also, and infrastructure. I mean, every sector of our normal life or of our daily lives will be affected by climate change. This is clear, and I would say mostly adversely affected, because they can be positive things. I mean, they can. So again, I repeat on the right the uncertainties. Emission scenario, we don't know what we will emit. Importance of global warming, regional characteristics of climate change. We don't know very well the regional characteristic of this change. The interaction between clouds, aerosol, and radiation is not well known. Also, the evolution of ice sheet, which is important for sea level change. And we have also the possibility of climate surprises. Climate surprises could be, for example, sometimes we evoke the Gulf Stream, which can stop or not. I mean, this is not probably not a real problem, but this has happened in the past, and so on. So we have a lot of questions. What is this plot again? Is to show you one thing which is for me really a consequence which can be important is about precipitation. It can be also important. You see, when you have a red, so you have summer and winter. So this has the bottom plot. When you have summer and winter, you see that all around in red, in green you have more precipitation. It's brown, you have less precipitation. And you have clearly less precipitation, in particular in summer around the Mediterranean. And if in this case, and you see Siberia, I will show better after that, you see that this can be a problem because water availability is already a problem around the Mediterranean. And if you have less precipitation and more evaporation, it's clear that this can be a problem, a serious problem in this region. So it's only to show you this region. I mean, when you look at, you probably recognize your place. Your place is Ekaterinbourg is somewhat on the. When you look at temperature change, it's somewhat of the 5 degrees C isoline warming. This is for the mid scenario. again. It's 5 degrees C warming practically in this region, at least this is the average of models. Again, so we talk of a warming of, in this model of less than 2 degrees C, less than 3 degrees C on the average. It's practically double in this region. Probably, I mean, the precipitation will not so much affected, slightly affected, but there will not be, I mean, we don't anticipate in decrease of precipitation in Western Siberia, it's clear. So, I continue. Oh, I have to do something. I really continue for something again, which is a global concern. I mean, concern in many places is sea level change. The point of sea level change is that sea level change could increase of at probably 60 centimeters or even more during this century. So 60 centimeters is really a lot. Really, I mean, it really makes a lot of sense for a coastal region where you have a lot of people. Indeed, this tell you, the red area tell you where you have coastal areas, very populated. These are also red. You see, you know certainly about Bangladesh, when you have the Brahmaputra and the Ganges, but there are a lot of, I mean, really other regions where you have a lot of very populated area, and where you have which are very sensitive to a sea level change of a few tenths of I mean 10 to 50 centimeters, even 50 centimeters in this area is really a problem. Okay, indeed. With a sea level change of 40 centimeters, half a meter practically, this will mean that 200 million people should leave the place where they live. It's not nothing. It could affect, it should have, I mean, probably it will affect million and million of people, more than 100 million of people. So one point is that what is probably most damaging in climate change is the change in extremes, in climate extremes. Indeed, so there was also a publication of IPCC on climate extreme recently, and the fact is that climate change will change climate extreme also. Yeah? So it's only to give you an idea of where we are now. Indeed, the disaster related to climate, not to climate change. I say to climate, because I mean, even without climate change, you have climate disasters. It's very, I mean, but you still have floods and droughts and so on. But they are increasing, not due to climate change itself, but to the fact that there is a lot of more to protect. I mean, the year which was the more damaging was the year of Katrina. It's 2005, and this huge cyclone on New Orleans in particular. You see this. Okay, so this is for damage. Because we have, indeed, in terms of money, climate disasters are more important in, I mean, makes, the loss of, the cost itself is more important, the cost of damage disaster is more important in developed countries than in that in developing countries. But when you look at fatalities that depths people, it's clearly that this is largely occurring for 95% in developing countries. So fatalities are very important. I mean, due to climate-related extreme events. we already see from over the last 50 years a change in extremes, but we will probably have also more higher change in extreme over the next century. I will not explain in detail this plot, but it tells you that, for example, this is for heat waves. It tells you that, but this depends on the region and on the scenario, but it tells you that in many places, and this is the case for Western Siberia indeed, in many cases, one heat wave which occurs every 20 years will occur at the end of the century, or can occur every 2 years. So there will be an increase of a factor of 10 in some countries, including of heat waves during summer. You also experience an heat wave, important heat wave, not in this area, but mostly in the Moscow area, I think in 2010. But so there will be a frequency, a clear increase of frequency of heat wave. So it depends on regions. There will be also the precipitation intensity will increase also. It can increase by, that means the amount of precipitation which falls during a given time. So this is the intensity of precipitation. And we have already more intense precipitation, and this intensity will increase. And this may have consequences on floods, for example, because if you have a huge amount of water falling in a shorter period, it's clear that it can translate in more devastating floods. So this also depends on regions, but it can be up to a factor of 2, so more intense precipitation. Again, so I show here the brown area are areas where there is a risk of more droughts. So I already focused on the Mediterranean, as you see, but it's also true for Western US, for a part of Southern America, for Southern Africa, for a part of Australia. So this may be a real problem in this region because you have already a competition for the use of water in these regions. The difficulty is that you will have less precipitation where you have already low precipitation, and you will have more precipitation when you have already a relatively high amount of precipitation. So it would be better in the other direction, but it's too bad, and this is what we can unfortunately expect. What should we do? So, what should we do is that politicians know exactly what we should do. All the countries in this world have signed the Climate Convention. This was in Rio 20 years ago. In 1 month, I will be in Rio for Rio plus 20. So, because the idea is that we should stabilize our climate. We cannot let the greenhouse gases increase without control. Otherwise, we will go towards really global warming, which are really damaging. Even so, okay, every country sign we should be able to stabilize our climate. But if you want to stabilize the climate, so the main contributor to global warming is carbon dioxide. And the main contribution to carbon dioxide emission are really fossil fuels. So we know exactly where it's come from. So if we want to really stabilize the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, we should not emit more than the biosphere and the ocean are able to take, because you have a source and you have a sink, and every year you see the figure. So if you look at the left, if we want to So you have the scenario I show you. The scenario I show you just now are a scenario of emission in the left plot. So I discuss scenario A2, A1B, B2. And you see that these three scenarios, if you remember, indeed, these three scenarios, maximum was 2,000 gigaton of carbon, and the lower one 1,000 gigaton of carbon approximately. And if we want to stabilize our climate, none of these scenarios are able to lead to a stabilization. If we want to stabilize our climate around 2 degrees C, that not to have a warming higher than 2 degrees C on the average, we should limit our emission over the century to about 500 gigaton. We should really, so this is a red curve. The point is that if we want really to limit the warming to 2 degrees C, and every country has signed this agreement, including Russia, this requires to stabilize the concentration before the end of this, before 2020. In 2020, we should have started to decrease our emission and to divide global emission by 3 until 2050. This is no way to if you don't do that, we will have a warming larger than 2 degrees C. And you see the difficulty because we ask to emission to decrease rapidly, to reach its maximum value and then to start to decrease over the coming years. And they have never increased as rapidly as over the last recent years. You see that we have currently an increase of 3% of emission every year. The emission increased 3 times more rapidly than over the 90s. So we have a rapid increase of emission due to countries like China, India, but this is not the point. Globally, we have an increase of emission. So, and obviously in Europe, we should do better than around the world because there is also the developing country, which it will be more difficult to ask them not to use more energy because there is a close link between energy and CO2 emission. And so it is clear that as a climatologist, the solution to limit global warming is really to go towards energy use which does not emit greenhouse gases. And for me, the first things to do, and I would say the priority should be to develop renewable energy. I will tell you. So don't think that what I am telling is only something which comes from climatologists. It's not true. You have the last report of the International Energy Agency. Okay, what tells the last report of this report a few months ago? What it tells? It tells that in short, if we want to limit the global warming to 2 degrees C, which is, and we will have to adapt to global warming, even if it is limited to 2 degrees C. If we want to do so, we should take stringent action to limit CO2 emission in particular. No, before 2017. This is really what is telling us International Energy Agency. And so a lot of argument is that, okay, but if we do that, it will cost a lot of money. You have to realize that if you don't do that now, it will cost much more money if you do that in 10 years, 15 years, because we cannot afford a climate change of 3 or 4 degrees C globally. We cannot afford this. This will be catastrophe. It's clear. So we have clearly to go towards a society, I mean, a development, low carbon society. This is clear and this is urgent. It's not in 50 years, it's no. That is clear. And we are not taking this way, this is also clear. But you have to realize that if you want to keep climate below 2 degrees C, we have to act now, and not in the second part of the century. So where are we? Again, I think we can do a lot on renewable energies. Obviously, on one hand, you have a fossil fuel which produce carbon dioxide. You have also agriculture, which also contribute. So when you think of energy use without emitting CO2, you can think of nuclear energy, obviously, and also of renewable energy. I feel the development of nuclear energy worldwide may be limited. Anyway, it will not produce more than 10% of, in the best case, less than 10% of the primary energy. So renewable, if you say renewable, you can be normally, presently, renewable energy. When we talk of renewable, we talk of solar energy, ocean energy, but bioenergy, but the biomass, and wind energy, hydropower, and geothermal energy. It's only 13% of energy now, but it is a political will. But really, on this I show here. Really, if we want to, there is a possibility to produce a significant, more larger part of our energy from renewables in 30 to 40 years. The figures which are here, okay, indeed we can expect, again, depending on what we will do, we can expect, this is the conclusion of the report on renewable energy from IPCC, we could, between 27 and 77, I say that we should be able to, if this was decided, because it's not decided, but technically we should be able to produce half of our energy in 2050 from renewables. I will not take the higher figures, but half of our energy, this includes both electricity and heat, not only electricity. Because when you have energy, you have a part of energy, a part of heat, and a part of electricity. So this is somewhat an optimistic view, but it's clear that there is a close link between the way we are living and obviously when you talk about climate change and the future of our climate. It's clear that for me that we have impact on our climate, and we will have more impact if we do nothing. But the message is that we can do a lot to limit global warming, and I really feel that this is necessary. And we have also a lot of research to do, and we will do it here in particular. Obviously, a region like Siberia is very important, both for the climate, for the carbon cycle, for the water cycle, to understand what occurs to permafrost and the albedo feedback. So I will conclude here, really trying to tell that global change is unfortunately a reality, and it is clear that if we do nothing, we can adapt to a global change, to a limited global change, but I don't think we can adapt to we can adapt to a global change which will not be, which will be higher than 2 to 3 degrees C. It will be more and more difficult, and this is really a challenge. This is your challenge also as a lot of you as scientists. There is a lot of innovation. This is very exciting indeed. This is a world in which it's a different development. It's not the end of the development, but we should go to a low carbon society. This is clear for, at least for a climatologist. Thank you.
John, thanks a lot for the interesting presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, now the question.
In Russian.
Уважаемые коллеги, вопросы можно задавать по-русски, если хотите, и по-английски, и мы Ирину попросим. Пожалуйста.
Можно по-английски или просто?
Как удобнее. Как удобнее.
Скажите, пожалуйста. I know that some research think that the reason for the global warming is increased temperature of our Earth, and this leads to the absorption CO2 from world ocean to air of our atmosphere. And I want to ask you how we can separate CO2 from natural process and CO2 from human industrial activity and
Yes.
in the global warming and in your anticipated influence.
Yes, so how we can do that? You can separate CO2 from natural processes to CO2 from, I would say, fossil fuels, looking at isotopes. You have two ways to look. I mean, one way is to look at carbon-14 isotopes. Practically, as fossil fuels are very old in their reservoirs, they have no longer carbon-14. Okay, they are carbon-14 free. And so you see very well when you look at carbon-14 change over the last decades and so on, but that what we are adding is really due to fossil fuel. We can also use carbon-13, and carbon-13 is also different from fossil fuels than from natural activities or exchange with the ocean. And we have another thing is to look at the oxygen concentration in the atmosphere, which is decreasing as expected when you put additional CO2 in the atmosphere. So we are really, and we know exactly the figures. Every year we emit 10 gigaton, 10 billion of tons, equivalents of CO2, of carbon under CO2 in the atmosphere. We know exactly this, and we also measure what is absorbed by the ocean, what is absorbed by the biosphere. I don't have the figure here, but I can send you the IPCC report, and it's very clear how we separate natural contribution and anthropogenic contribution on CO2 emission. This is, yes, it's mostly isotopes.
Sure.
The question is, the European Union pays very much attention about lowering the greenhouse gases emission. The question is, how European Union is going to control the agricultural activity in so-called countries like Africa, China, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and so on and so forth. The population grows very rapidly.
Yes.
You cannot control this.
No, no, you are right. It's a very difficult problem. In European Union, I think we contribute to 13% of emissions. Okay, or something like that. It may be 14, but anyway, 13% of emissions for worldwide emissions. Obviously, even if we divide our emission by a factor of 4, but if emission of other countries continue to increase, the emission will continue to increase. It's clear. That is I myself involved in the negotiation. That is the key of the negotiation. You cannot reach your goal if there is not an effort of our country around the world to limit their emission. What was done in the climate convention, and this was seen in the Kyoto Protocol, is that everyone admits that developed countries should go faster and have more stringent objectives than developing countries. It's not that Obviously, if developing countries, you mentioned China, India, are not doing an effort, we are unable to tackle the problem. I agree totally with you. But, I mean, for example, in China, China was very active. In the last conference was in Durban, and they are active, and they are also, for example, they are the first country as far as producing direct, solar energy and wind energy. So they know the problem. I mean, I hope that this will translate in that they also use a lot of coal. But I agree. I mean, one country alone cannot solve the problem. You have to. It's really a global problem because I mean, a global problem as far as emission is concerned. As far as consequences, it's clear that every country will have consequences. And most of the consequences are adverse consequences. You can think, I totally agree that in this area, that if you have a warming of 5 degrees, I mean, it's not the end of the world. You will certainly be able to adapt. You have also some people who see the opening of the Arctic, and the fact that you will have no longer Arctic ice during the summer as an opportunity. It's true that is an opportunity to find new oils and new gas, but it's not an opportunity to really tackle the climate problem. But I agree with you. I mean, we should go all together. But I mean, I am proud that Europe was willing to sign, but it was the only one with Australia and New Zealand willing to sign the second phase of the Kyoto Protocol, because it's important. You are entirely correct. Europe alone cannot solve the problem.
Я на русском языке. Скажите, пожалуйста, вот две катастрофы недавние, это выбросы в Мексиканском заливе нефти и извержение вулкана с сложным названием. Отмечено ли вот такое глобальное влияние на климат вот этих катастроф? Или это локальная вещь, которая...
So the question is about two catastrophes that we had recently. One is for Mexican Gulf, and another one is a volcano with those typical glowing flames. Is anybody was wondering what was the influence of these two catastrophes on what's going on with the climate?
It's not so much. It's not so important. Even what occurs in the Gulf of Mexico is more. There was not a lot of the oil which was burnt in the atmosphere. There were more of the oil in the. It's maybe important for pollution of the ocean, but it's also very important for pollution of coastal area around New Orleans. But it's not important for climate change. I mean, it's really. And for the volcano, which one? So, Irina.
Okay, anybody can spell the name Eiffel-Kul?
No, it's nothing. Eiffel-Kul. It's the same thing. No, even this is. It was more important for flights and for climate.
So it's like local influence.
Yeah, local influence, but not. No, it's not global. But when you look at, it's not global, but because when you look at largest emission, for example, Toba, one of the largest emission of historical times was Toba in 1815, and you had really a year without a summer the year after. I mean, all around the world. I mean, but with respect to Toba 200 years ago, it's practically Eiffel-Kul is not so important. It's not global, but you had really. And even, Pinatubo, when you look at Pinatubo, when you look at temperature record just after Pinatubo, you see a decrease of temperature of few tenths of degrees C, and 2 or 3 years after, you go again along your trajectory. But if you have really to have huge volcano to have a sizable effect on climate. So Pinatubo, Toba. Smith, there is one here. I'm sorry, one here. Go. Alors, ça va, oui.
You already told about your institute, and I have a question whether you have any projects with maybe a politics institute to make maybe another Kyoto Protocol for people to try to do it better.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, it's part of negotiation. I mean, really. So it was relatively disappointed last time. This was in in Durban last year. And what was decided is what the Kyoto Protocol will be continued, the second phase, but only Europe and Australia and New Zealand really signed. So, but there is also really at least a prospect to have a new agreement after 2020. And I'm not myself working on this new agreement, but I have colleagues working on it. I mean, I'm sharing one institute, which is called Institute for International Studies on Sustainable Development, which is, I have a lot of colleagues working on it. I am relatively involved in, I was involved in France in the process we call the Grenelle de l'Environnement. So we try to identify solutions in transport, in buildings, in energy system to really reach the objective of France. But myself, I am a scientist, but no, I discuss with the politicians of this, but there are research and there are propositions to have a new agreement, but not myself directly, but I know people doing it. And here, do you have some, so I have a question for you. So who are you? Are the economists here? No economists? Some economists, okay. Okay. Thank you.
Насколько сильно будет уменьшать содержание углекислого газа и, следовательно, парниковый эффект потепления и увеличения вегетационного... Еще раз. Насколько сильно будет уменьшать содержание углекислого газа, парникового эффекта и потепления, увеличение вегетационного периода растений, то есть за счет их переработки углекислого газа?
Вегетационный период.
Растения помещают углекислый газ. Чем больше углекислого газа, тем они больше предназначают.
Yes. So it's clear that so you have to probably I will mention some figures which are relevant to the biosphere. So your question is about the biosphere and what we can do. So first, the deforestation contributes significantly to global emissions. But when we talk in billion of tons, it's go from 2 billion. 2 billion of tons, gigatons. So I would say last decades it was up to 20% of CO2 emissions were due to deforestation, and now it's more 10% due to deforestation. But what is interesting is that even if you have deforestation, globally the vegetation is pumping CO2. So, versus the idea would be to cover the desert from, I think it was a question of trees, which would be nice, but you have two things that look at two things. It's that you need water, and it's really a problem in some. You have areas that when you can put more trees. You can put water, you need water, and also even if you put trees, at some point you have equilibrium. When your trees are grown, you have equilibrium. They no longer pump CO2, and they also produce CO2. So it's a nice solution, but the only solution to really to really decrease the emission is to decrease. So indeed, we have to decrease the global use of fossil fuel. We can also envisage carbon storage is also envisaged, carbon trapping and storage. So this is also envisaged. But I think vegetation, at least if we could stop the deforestation, this would be very important in the first stage.
Еще вопрос, пожалуйста.
My friend.
The nature is so powerful, and in the nearest future, or after they pass some critical point, some non-linear negative natural feedback may to appear, and this will force the climate to the normal conditions, maybe. How do you think it's possible?
Yes, I mean, you are right. What is important in... I mean, what is the difficulty is that you have feedbacks. Okay. You have feedbacks, and indeed, if you were in a world without feedbacks, the warming will be really limited to 1 or 2 degrees C, even if you emit a lot of carbon dioxide. The problem of feedbacks is that the feedbacks which are well identified are negative, are positive. The fact that when you have a decrease of sea ice or sea extent, you replace surface which are reflecting surfaces but absorbing surfaces, this is a positive feedback. When the warming causes an increase of water vapor in the atmosphere, because of as the water vapor itself is greenhouse gases, this is a positive feedback. So obviously it would be nice to have negative feedback, but no, it would be. So the idea would be to have a negative feedback from what could be negative feedback from clouds, but some people think that there can be interaction between galactic rays on clouds that make negative feedbacks, but it does not seem to work. I mean, you have to realize that you know this. I mean, you are heating your system. So if you heat a system and that you hope that the temperature will not increase, you have to have strong negative feedback. Another problem is that in the long term, we can hope also that we have had glacial and interglacial period in the past. So we can say also naturally we will go towards a new ice age, which may be true. But this is only probably more than 10,000 years or even 20,000 years, and so it cannot be envisaged over the last millennium. So the difficulty of negative feedbacks or thing, so the problem is that when we think of feedbacks, unfortunately, those who are well identified are positive. So you may know from one scientist, Dick Lindsay, would propose a series of mechanisms which could really produce negative feedback, but the point is that none of these mechanisms are really well identified in nature. So it would be better with a world with negative feedbacks, but if you can produce them, I agree. You have to find them, yes?
We can consider yours as warming machine, yes? The equator is heating system and Antarctic is refrigerator. If so, according to your report, the temperature of equator increase slowly in comparison with temperature of Antarctic. Yeah? So if this process develops more, the efficiency of warming machine decrease. So all process will be decreased too. Maybe it was some compensation.
Yeah, we can. No, this is interesting, but I mean, we have no compulsion. I mean, when you look at World War map, yeah. Yes, for the what is happening for the moment is that warming is because what's happened in the Arctic, for example, is you have this albedo feedback does not play a role in the Antarctic, simply because the extent of ice is not. I mean, you have only ice. I mean, you have no continent free of ice. Okay, so this is or sea ice is not changing, but we don't see. I mean, you can see indeed. I mean, is what you produce in GCM. I mean, you see this temperature warming, but we don't anticipate that at some point. I agree that warming is different in Antarctica and in the Arctic, but when you look at warming here, I mean, all the when you don't see compensation. You have not. At the end of the century, you have warming both in Antarctica and in the Arctic region and over the world. It's less important. I agree. It's less important. It's still less important in Antarctica, but you have no. I mean, we don't see a way to compensate because you are still adding heat, and so I know this proposition, but I think it. I mean, I would like to see a thermodynamical model showing this, but I mean you have no clear argument. I know this, but how do you see a clear argument? Is what when you add it you warm all the world. This is not uniform. I agree, but you have no compensating area. You have no blue area here. So I mean I know this discussion.
What is the reason of this white spot on the map?
This is interesting. This is because, okay, why? Because you have a change in the oceanic circulation, and when you have a decrease of the strength of the Gulf Stream, and the Gulf Stream is so you have when you warm, you add. You have fresh water in the North Atlantic, and when you add fresh water in the North Atlantic, you have a tendency. The Gulf Stream has more difficulty. I mean, you have a decrease of the flux of the Gulf Stream, and this decrease translates. The Gulf Stream brings heat from tropical areas to the areas to the North Atlantic. And when you have a decrease of the Gulf Stream, so you have less warming in the North Atlantic, and this is what you see. It's really the Gulf Stream. It's not. Yeah. It's not that the Gulf Stream is stopping, but it's only less intense, and this is sufficient to explain the fact that you have less warming. It's really due to fresh water.
Sorry, but another place in Pacific Ocean.
Yes, also yes, yes, but this. This is the same because you have two places of production of deep water in the world. You have the North Atlantic and what we call the Weddell Sea around Antarctica. And this is the same. This is the Weddell Sea. Yeah, around Antarctica. And so again, you have production of deep waters, which is you have less, less intense oceanic circulation and in this area.
Еще последний вопрос, давайте.
In your report, you show us a lot of examples of negative influence of global warming on economy. Maybe you know some positive?
Yes.
Because on the Euro, we think that global warming is not very bad. Because we have cold winter and some more degrees in winter will be good for us.
No, this is okay. This is a good point. I mean, we cannot. When we evaluate global warming impacts, we should also mention that some impacts can be positive. Yes, I agree totally, and this is what I mentioned. I mean, it is maybe not a problem to have the 5 degrees C warming, I can close this. 2 points. I mean, when we talk of agriculture, because this is important also, because when we talk of agriculture, indeed, when you have a warming which is limited to 2 or 3 degrees C, you see in agricultural models that you have some areas, as Siberia, where productivity increases, and some other area where productivity decreases. So if you have a limited warming, agricultural productivity should not be affected if warming is limited. But when you have larger warming, it's clear that you are losing both in mid-latitude and in tropical areas. So I mean, the compensation you can have between agriculture, I mean, increase of agriculture, productivity in new regions and in other regions, it's quite correct if the warming is limited. It's not so true if the warming is important. Yes, you have also, is what I mentioned, some can see as the opening of the Arctic, the disappearance of the Arctic sea ice during summer, which will start to occur and which will occur more and more often, as an opportunity for developing a northern country. I agree totally also. But when you look at a global scale, it is clear that in terms of economy, I mean, this was evaluated by the report of Stern review. I mean, in terms of cost, global cost is really negative for the entire world. I mean, I agree totally that some region can benefit from global warming, obviously, Sicily also, but it's not so true for Russia. I mean, if you look at Russia as a whole, it may be true for part of Russia, but it may be also negative in other part of Russia. I mean, if you have also heat waves like you had 2 years ago, no? 2010, it's not very beneficial. So, I mean, you are right. You have to look at both sides, and we do so.
Okay, thanks a lot again.